So the CISO for SolarWinds was sued because of that breach, because they didn't take care for what people thought they should. I think absolutely that we're headed in the space of, a CISO needing D&O insurance.
This is a Security Weekly production. Security Weekly is a resource of Cyber Risk Alliance.
The Cybersecurity Collaborative, in conjunction with Cyber Reason, is proud to present CISO Stories. Each week, CISO Stories takes a deep dive on security leadership. The Cybersecurity Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/CSC. I'm joined today by Leon Ravenna, who is the CISO for CAR Global. That's CAR with a K. Leon, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sam. We appreciate you having me.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. And all of our conversations have been fun in the past. So there's a few topics we've discussed back and forth, and I thought maybe we go through them. And the first and foremost, I think, is cyber insurance. And maybe share a little bit about your perspective on cyber insurance and where you think it's headed.
Sure. So if you have cyber insurance today and it is your only security control, I would prepare to not have it much longer. But what's happened over the last 18 months with the advent of ransomware and other breaches is that cyber insurance companies are getting a lot more, quite frankly, intelligent about what they're doing, and they're going to probe a lot deeper. And so I would anticipate that if you don't have EDR today, you're in a world of hurt. If you aren't looking at network segmentation over the next 12 to 18 months, I think you're going to be in a world of hurt. So it's more, they're getting a lot more intelligent about what they do, how they do it, and quite frankly, the risk that they're willing to take on.
Yeah, I'll come back to that world of hurt in a moment. But certainly, 4 or 5 years ago, I heard from a number of insurance companies that they couldn't build the actuarial tables. They couldn't understand. I mean, it's easy when you're dealing with hurricanes and fire, right? You can take measures that progressively make you more resistant. But when you have an intelligent, adaptive opponent, it's incredibly hard to make the predictive models for that. Do you think that's changed, or do you think it's reflected in things like premiums and payouts?
Well, I think there's a couple things. When I say they've gotten more intelligent, it's understanding more about what their customers are doing, how they're doing it, what helps you mitigate risk. And quite frankly, as you build more of the security capabilities, you start to be able to look at this more as a hurricane, a fire, things like that for loss. And so I really think that it's a combination of people have gotten better at what they're doing on the security side. The bad guys have gotten better at what they're doing. And the insurance companies have gotten a lot better at understanding what the relevant risk is.
Right. And it's knowing that if you do certain minimum things, then the point of least resistance isn't going to be you, all right? The path to the best money for the attackers. So less risk, essentially.
Correct.
Now, on that world of hurt comment, we've just seen the White House put out an executive order, and they followed it up again with a memo that is making it a requirement for the government to have EDR. And you mentioned EDR, and if you don't have it, you're in a world of hurt. They've also put out things about, software bill of materials, for instance, and other requirements. It looks like just as the specificity in insurance is getting heavier, like what you should do, the regulatory burden is increasing. Is this going to continue, do you think? Do you think we're just going to see more requirements and bigger fines? What do you think is the future evolution of that? And is there a silver lining on this?
Well, when I did PCI level 1 and I did NIST 853, they were a hassle to go through. But it actually made you better. There was no individual control that I disagreed with, but it was in aggregate that was hard. And I think what's happening is people are going to get better. Quite frankly, right now the government is mandating that that their organizations have a software bill of material, but that will trickle down into the private sector pretty quickly. I think that as you start to shed light on those things, for instance, the White House either just did or will soon mandate a 72-hour reporting period for breaches within the federal government. Now, that will surely translate down. And if you look at things like GDPR, we're into already 24 hours notice on things. And so those will just be the standard operating principles. So while it's hard to do and get done all at once, I think that over time it actually will make you better. And to the point about world of hurt, the making sure that you have those protections in place working like they're meant to is really going to be more table stakes than anything else. It's going to be the things that you have to operate. And I can see, well, I know that some carriers have already said, hey, you don't have EDR in place, so we can't cover you. I think what we'll ultimately end up seeing is a cost sharing model where, the insurance company will say, yeah, you pay your deductible, and then we will split anything that's ransomware 50-50.
Yeah, I remember back in 2002, I went to meet with a bank. At the time I worked for a vendor. We were building an early SIM solution. And I remember sitting with a CISO, and the CISO said, hey, look, Sam, if I don't know about it, I don't have to deal with it. And of course, I didn't continue banking there. But 2 years later, FFIEC came out and said, everybody has to have a SIM, and everybody bought one. And
Right.
then what I noticed was other regulations literally lifted the language and did so faster. So HIPAA got it and PCI DSS got it. And so it was sort of like when the first one went, the dominoes fell and everybody moved up a level in at least one maturity dimension, right? If we like SIM-MC. But there were two dials to play with, right? It was get more specific on what's required or drive up the pain of the fine. I believe that if we're not actually seeing better results, that will continue until the point where it could actually hurt us all a lot.
When GDPR came out, one of my first, and I am a remarkably cynical person, but one of my first thoughts was it's a way to increase revenue. You can't necessarily increase taxes. So, if you go find the big players, then that, it helps. But I think, overall, again, you have to look at it in the context of not necessarily what's happening right now, this instant, because quite frankly, it will be pain. For instance, network segmentation. I tell people often, if you have a company that's 10, 15, 20 years old, you have three problems. You have an AD problem, more than likely. Mm-hmm. You have a Java or a .NET problem, and you probably have a segmentation problem because everybody put everything in the data center and they didn't think about what they were going to have to do to untangle it later. And so you really have to look at it in terms of there will be some initial pain to go through it, but ultimately that's what you're going to have to get to be able to operate in a proactive manner going forward.
So it's less meetings will continue until morale improves, and more take your medicine, you really will get better.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
And I get that. Now you mentioned GDPR. Yes. And I would be remiss, and I remember how much we all stared at that 4% of top line, which may sound like a little to people who don't understand P&Ls. That is a massive impact on net profit margin, right? It can break companies. But I'd be remiss if I didn't use that to pivot a little bit to privacy. And who do you think is going to get the privacy hot seat maybe? Is this a CISO inevitability, or is it likely to evolve differently, do you think?
Well, I think in terms of the company size, so say, up to about $1 billion, maybe $1.5 billion, I think the CISO is going to be voluntold to take privacy. And quite frankly, I see them also sharing some of the risk portfolio as well, because quite frankly, you want that bad news coming from one person, not from multiple people who are vying for, for different budgets and things like that. In our case, my group takes care for the tactical elements of privacy. So, it's the website pieces, the data mapping, things like that. And then we have a chief privacy officer who is in legal and takes care of the legal components. And that seems to work pretty well. But I think that if you are a CISO today and you shy away from the privacy aspects, you're probably doing yourself a disservice in a couple of ways. The first is you're going to get voluntold to do it because at the end of the day, all that matters is the data. And that's what you're protecting from a security standpoint. The privacy piece just overlays some things on top of it. But at its core, that's what you're doing anyway. And quite frankly, as you go forward, I think you're going to have to, because you need to have some level of control, and you don't want to be arguing about, well, how do I encrypt that data? And then how do I protect the data? How do I obfuscate it? A lot of the similarities are there. So I think that if you don't have it today, you may have it in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. In fact, it kind of works that way for me. I have a peer in the legal org who's a privacy expert from a legal perspective, but I'm not a lawyer and I don't play one on TV, and I don't get engaged in legal competition. I'm a techie and a business person. And so that partnership has evolved. I've seen it work a little differently, but it seems to be trending that way generally. But this, of course, raises the issue. And I'd love your take on it. This notion in some businesses of fiduciary responsibility that, with things like brokerages and in some cases, stock exchanges and banking, somebody with fiduciary responsibility has a responsibility to the customer and to their financial well-being as the top driver, as opposed to what everyone else in the company has. Do you think we're headed in a direction where you've got an almost fiduciary responsibility of security or privacy? And if so, does that imply almost like needing D&O type insurance? The yes. Directors. So maybe riff on that a bit. Do you think we're headed in a direction, or am I overreacting to think of it?
No, I think the CISO for SolarWinds was sued because of that breach, because they didn't take care for what people thought they should. I think absolutely that we're headed in the space of a CISO needing D&O insurance. There's a lot of things to worry about as a CISO today. It isn't all that sexy stuff that people think it actually is, but the things that worry you, naturally are we going to be breached? When are we going to be breached? How is it going to happen? How am I protecting? But you're starting to think about, could I be sued? Will I end up at some point testifying in trial? Those type things are, in addition to the, hey, if we get breached, historically it was a CISO that gets walked out the door. So I think there's a lot to worry about. But you know what it is, as one of the guys that works for me, who does a lot of customer communication, it's the best job in the company with all of that goes with it. It
is. I have to say, my brother said he was never surprised I wound up a quote defender. So, all my life I've always felt that way. And so it's not a surprise to me I wound up in a business like that. But staying on the topic of risk, I feel like we're more than just data risk managers. That if this pseudo fiduciary responsibility emerges, it's on us to establish principles, like a normative framework for people to make decisions. So in my policies, for instance, for security department, I put in there that it's a first principle that we don't hold information back that would allow our customers to make risk decisions, and we should default to transparency. Right? That when we're not sure, be open. And that's difficult to do. I don't think a lot of people are thinking in those terms. So you've got to make sure, not just that it's not about covering yourself. It's about making sure that you're following the right priorities, right? What comes first? Is it sitting on information and being cagey, or is it opening up and defaulting to giving information to people? And rather than have to give that direction, I'd like to see it start to emerge. But so do you think that the directors and do you think that the directors and officers liability insurance is directly applicable, or do you think that there's something else that needs to come about?
No, I think it'll ultimately be covered by D&O insurance, but going back to the point that you raised about being cagey or being transparent, I do every month for the chief digital officer and his 4 direct reports. We have 17 lines of business, and then his 4 key reports on the development side. I give them a security posture for their group every month, and it's quite frankly the good, the bad, and the ugly. We go over a cloud posture, we go over vulnerabilities, we go over any data that I have that is meaningful data, I give them because I want them to know. And as you work up in the organization, there's less detail that people actually want. But I've always thought I'm not smart enough to lie.
I think you're smart enough. It's hard to maintain it, right? That takes energy.
Yeah. It's really here's what it is, and here's where the things, the roadmap for you to go take care for these items. And so I think being as transparent as possible. It's interesting sitting when I report to the risk committee, and I've done that every quarter since middle of 14. What they really want is what's the bad stuff happening. Inside the risk committee, it's more, they don't necessarily care that everything is good, or hey, didn't have any incidents last month, or really they want to know what's bad. And it's conceptually different, and it's a different attitude to be in there as opposed to, hey, everything's great, sales are great and everything's peachy, as opposed to here's where we're struggling, here's where we need help to do stuff, and that's really hard to do. And I've had to work to get to the point of being able to do that.
Well, that's hard for a few reasons. I mean, we as security people have gotten to where we are often by being right and proving our competence. And it feels like when you show red on a dashboard or things aren't right, that somehow your competence is in question. But speaking now, putting on my other hat, as somebody who has been a director for a company and as an executive in a company, I don't trust green. Green tells me you're not digging deep enough, right? It tells me that you're glossing things over, because often when things look green, things go wrong. But if I see orange and red, I know you're working on it.
And that's exactly the way that it has been characterized to me by the people that I report to, is that all green is not good. It means either you're not pushing hard enough, or you set the bar way too low.
Yeah, and red is an opportunity to go and ask for things, to logistically get support. So not just for the sake of getting it, but so that you can really go burn things down. And I found that red is your friend for budget and business alignment.
It is, but I also think that it's to be able to tell the story. It's there's not always going to be an ask tied to a red or a yellow. It's more of a, hey, here's where we may be struggling. Here's what we need to work on. Here's where we need additional focus. And so I think from that perspective, it is better to have red in those dashboards. And quite frankly, one of the things that I do with my boss, who's the CFO, is we have a weekly meeting. It's 30 minutes, and it's the top 5 things that spook me. And, it could be something we're doing. A few weeks ago, it was, a combination of world events. It was supply chain stuff. It was, China flying planes over Taiwan. And in our industry, we are heavily dependent on semiconductors for new vehicles, so we can sell used vehicles. And Taiwan makes 50% of the world's semiconductors. So it was more of a, here's the global things that are spooking me right now. And sometimes he talks me off the ledge, and sometimes like, yeah, let's go dig into some of that stuff.
But you see, that's great. You can be the voice of risk, and just as I see it, I mean, our job isn't just to scare; that's a business conversation at that point. And in a sense, you're the chief storyteller for risk. But I know we're approaching the end of our time, and I'd be remiss if I didn't take the story thread and go to the other end of the spectrum that I know you love, and that's the buzzword end of things. Zero trust, CASB, SASE. Some of it may have value. It's funny. There's even I think Gartner calls it a hype cycle, right? Like acknowledging that these things will first be blown up to be too much, then the people will get disillusioned, and then they'll finally be productive. What do you make of buzzwords, and what are your favorite ones right now? If they're the ones I just named, I apologize, but what's your take?
It's going to be zero trust. I mean, I was at Interactive Intelligence in 2014. We were talking zero trust, and and it was more. I tell the story, and today is my 35th wedding anniversary, so I can probably get away with it. Yeah. Is that, there's days I don't trust my wife, and I've been married to her for 35 years. And it's not because of, that she hasn't earned the trust. It's just that there's things that, I will tell her, here's what's going to happen in the future, and she'll laugh at me. And she'll say, you put your tinfoil hat on, and, about 6 months later, she says, oh, you were right on that. And so the zero trust piece, any of the buzzwords, the problem is you can get caught up in that. And, if you live your life trying to address the latest buzzword, you're 9 months behind out of the gate. And so what I caution people to do is, hey, build your strategy and follow your strategy. You may want to adjust, but you're not going to recreate the strategy. I'll give you probably the best example that I have is I do a lot of privacy work. I have 6 privacy certs. I built out our privacy stuff in Europe. And when we looked at CCPA and CPRA, I said, what we need to do is blend the two to take the best of both worlds, because when we do that, what we will then do is we may have to adjust, but we will cover all of the key points and not have to reload and not have to rebuild. And that has worked, even though there's, new strategies, new tools, new ways to do stuff. And so I think as you look at it, if I would tell people, build your strategy and live by it, but don't succumb to, well, the newest buzzword says this, and I got to go spend money on this thing because it's new and shiny and it's going to be hard to implement. So, go with what you know and build it that way, as opposed to chasing whatever's new.
So I've got to share a story just for fun. Back in 2005, I was on a panel in a big, I think it was RSA conference, and someone put their hand up and said, hey, I work for a large hospital. I'm doing NAC, right? As part of the SDN stuff back in the day, self-defending networks, right? Not software-defined networks now. And he said, what should I do first? And I did not mean to put him on the spot. I turned around and said, well, that depends on your priorities. Why are you doing it? And he said, well, because it's NAC. Meaning, and let's be clear, NAC was about, in essence, while it was a great idea, and while it did provide quite a bit of value, it was really about refreshing Cisco hardware at the time. And if you think I'm minimizing it, that's fine. But he then looked at me and said, well, because it's NAC. And I said, yeah, but what's the priority for the 30,000 person employee hospital system? And he said, I don't have one. And he said it in front of a large crowd of people. And I just felt like, oh, I've just ruined this guy's day and he doesn't know it yet. And it was not my intent. And that's what this feels like to some degree. Zero trust is almost a principle, right? It's like least privilege, least function, least trust. It's a good thing. But yes. I don't think anybody wants to leap to it. Because if you went up to your CIO and said, hey, I got a great idea. Let's just make sure that nothing connects to anything until you ask for it. And we get aggressive at shutting stuff down. Here's what he or her hears, right? He or she hears. They hear, I would like to make sure nothing connects You're in troubleshooting hell. Tickets get opened and never closed. Doesn't that sound great?
100%. Yeah. What's really interesting there is that the network guy's job is to open those pipes up, and our job is to shut them tight. And so there's got to be a balance there. I've worked really hard to build the relationship with our IT guys to be able to say, you know what, we're not always going to tell you no. We're going to tell you, we may tell you, hey, here's a better, faster way to do that. But let's talk through it first and build the relationship so we can have that discussion, not just the, hey, I'm going to shut you down.
Yep. And so I guess we could say zero trust is really a least trust principle that you try to ratchet incrementally and do so with a business partner. You say, I will do no more than this amount of harm. We're going to agree on that level. And we're going to make sure it's worth the reduction. So something big comes along and says, I can remove a lot of the residual trust in your environment. I'm going to call it a zero trust project if you want, but it had better mean at very little pain, massive risk reduction for very little pain. And that could be interesting. You might place a bet on it, but simply because it was just because NAC, it shouldn't be because ZT or ZTNA.
Yeah. I mean, the whole notion about NAC is companies went out and did that, and then they realized that, I have to have 802.1x compatible equipment, and I don't. And I think that's why I say, follow your strategy, and if you are aligned with your CIO, and I in this case work for the CFO by design, and it is primarily so I can have the conversation that says your baby's ugly, and and they know that, and they appreciate that, because I don't do it often. It's more, hey, here's how we can make things better. But I think having the same conversation that you talked about on, here's what we need to do. Here are the first 3 steps we need to do to go make that happen. And it's not, around buzzwords. It's more around, I'm going to work with you to protect your assets, because that's what we need to do as an organization. So here's how we get started, and here's how we understand if we're being successful. I think that's a much better way to characterize the conversation with people, because quite frankly, if I go to them and say I'm doing zero trust without context, they're going to laugh at me and slam the door.
And that is a beautiful way to end it. Leon, I'm so grateful that you came on. I've enjoyed this conversation, and thank you for that. I look forward to our next talk.
Sounds great. Thank you, Sam. Appreciate it.
Cybereason is the champion for today's defenders, providing an endpoint security platform to prevent, detect, and respond to malicious operations on computers, mobile devices, servers, and the cloud. Cybereason. End cyber attacks from endpoints to the enterprise to everywhere. Learn more at cybereason.com/CISO stories.